Good morning to those of you joining us in person here today, and good morning to, or good afternoon or good evening to those of you joining us online. And welcome to this session on Two-Eyed Seeing, Indigenous Values for Climate Resilient Water Management, which is being convened by the Australian Water Partnership, the University of Canberra and the Stockholm International Water Institute. So my name is Llewellyn Martin. I'm an Assistant Secretary in the Australian Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, and I'm a Cooma Kamilaroi woman from Australia's First Nations, and it gives me great pleasure to be your host for this session today. So I'll begin by acknowledging country. So some of you may know that this is a practice that we have in Australia, which is based on our traditional customs and protocols, and it's a way that we honour and we pay respect to the First Nations people's ancient connections to land, and it's a way that we can connect with country when we're visiting a new place, and it's also a way to remind ourselves in Australia that sovereignty of land was never ceded. So I acknowledge the Sami people, and I pay my respect to the Sami people, their elders and their ancestors, and I thank them for their generosity in hosting us here. And I'll shortly invite Inga Albinson from the Stockholm Sami Association to say a few words to you today. But firstly, I just wanted to kind of set the scene a bit for what we're going to hear about today and what we're going to learn about. So, traditional knowledge, because of these deep connections to land that I was referring to, that First Nations peoples hold to land and to waters and to country. Over millennia, Indigenous knowledge systems and practices have developed to support holistic approaches to caring for country. And so when we talk about traditional knowledge, it consists of observations, of oral and written knowledge, of innovations, of practices, and of beliefs. And it comes through this thousands and thousands of years of cumulative knowledge from caring for country. Traditional knowledge promotes sustainability and the responsible stewardship of cultural and natural resources through the relationships between humans and their natural environments. And approaches are holistic. The health of country is understood as being reflected in and maintained through a complex web of interactions and dependencies. And this means that knowledge is location specific. So what's two-eyed seeing all about then? So two-eyed seeing, or eduardemunk, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is a guiding principle that was articulated by Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall. And according to the Institute for Integrative Science and Health, it refers to learning to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing, and the other eye with the strengths of Western knowledge and ways of knowing, and learning how to use both eyes for the benefit of all. Two-eyed seeing has also been described as the gift of multiple perspectives. And this really resonates with me because I think the opportunity that we have to combine the precious and priceless traditional knowledge collected over millennia with the power of Western scientific methods really is a gift to humanity as we confront our most pressing threats to our waters and our lands and our communities that climate change presents. So it's really pleasing to see that this is being increasingly recognised around the world, and efforts are being made to increase First Nations people's participation in water management as a means to addressing contemporary and future issues. And this isn't always easy, and too often we fail to benefit from a two-eyed seeing approach because our modern institutions and decision-making processes kind of lack the capacity to appropriately access and incorporate and apply traditional knowledge. So a challenge for all of you in the audience today as we listen to our First Nations experts is to consider how you can make space for traditional knowledge and approaches in your work in order to benefit from seeing with two eyes. So, these are our very eminent experts who you'll be hearing from today. But before I begin inviting them to the stage, I'll just firstly call Inge Albinson to say a few words to us. Now, Inge is the president of the Stockholm Sami Association and was a very kind and generous host for First Nations participants at a pre-event on Sunday. So Inge, please, can you come on up?
This seems to be for tall people. Can you hear me? I have always wanted to do this kind of introduction like Llewellyn did, because I've never heard it in Sweden. I have part of my family in Australia, in Tasmania, my daughter and my grandchildren. So I learned it especially from Tassie and also from Australia, the way of sort of recognizing the land. And when we started to do the preparation for this event to happen, I thought this would be something that I've never heard it here exactly. So I will do it once again, just shortly. And it's a translation and an alteration from some people I've met in Australia. So it's not exactly the same. Some of the Swedish land is Sami land, and we don't own it, but we have the right to use it. We have the custodian of that land since immemorial time. We acknowledge the Sami people and as the traditional and continuing custodians of the land, seas, mountains, forest, water, and rivers. We recognize the continuing connection to land and water and culture and pay our respect to the elders, the past, in past and present. And also we express gratitude to the knowledge that they have and that we will try to carry on. And we also acknowledge the emerging younger leaders in our society. So hopefully we, talking about two-eyed seeings, we embrace the spirit of reconciliation, working towards more self-determination in our land, equity of outcome, and an equal voice for Sweden's Sami people. And we also thank the land of Stockholm here, which is a town on water, an island, which is very suitable for this water week, I think. So we have had a couple of days and meeting First Nations people from all over the world. So we have already started sharing of experiences, and that has been so good. And it is also important that we carry that forward after this meeting. So we will continue to, in one way or another, to do some networking. For you who haven't been with us these days, we could very shortly tell, when we talk about Sápmi, the Sami land, it's not only Sweden, it's Norway, and it's Finland and a part of Russia in the Kola Peninsula as well. And we are not only reindeer herders, we are doing all kind of stuff. Hunting, fishing, and handicraft, and some of us are urban, we live in towns. So even Stockholm is a part of Sápmi, since I think at least a third of all Sami people in Sweden live in the Stockholm area. I think the biggest challenge we have for the moment being is the so-called green transition, which means, especially in the north, that there are a lot of mining, a lot of windcraft, and a lot of, looking for rare metals, problems with water, and all kinds of stuff. And that is really very difficult, because it seems sometimes that maybe Sami people are against the green transition, but we call it more the green colonization. of course, we are not against new practices and new experiences and science about environmental issues, but it has to be together with the traditional knowledge. We have lived there, as many of you have lived at your places, and we have inherited a lot of knowledge about how to see and take care of the land, not only for this generation, but also for the generations to come. So that is the challenge for all of us, I think. And but it's a good way of learning to listen to each other and learn from each other, and not just dwell about on all the things that are not so good, but also think about and having the good examples of other places and say, how can we translate that into a Sami context, or an Aboriginal context, or the Maori, or in Thailand, or in Canada. So we have so much to learn from each other.
Thank you, Inga, for being so generous in sharing your culture and in welcoming us here today. So we will move on now to Dr. Milika Sobey. So Dr. Sobey is an Indigenous Fijian, an academic, a researcher and technical advisor, and she's passionate about marine biology, freshwater systems, and preserving Indigenous cultural values. Milika, please come on up.
What they fail to say is that I'm not so adept at operating technology, so hopefully I'll get it right this time. Good. Can I just start by acknowledging the Sami people? You've extended us wonderful hospitality for the last few days, and I appreciate very much your warm welcome to those of us from the other First Nations. I'd also like to acknowledge two people that helped me with this piece of research. One I consider a national treasure from Fiji. She's an 84-year-old lady who's just finished what I call the Bible of healing plants of Fiji, Mrs. Suliana Siwatimbao. She's 84, published this wonderful book, and she was very obliging with all my questions about indicator species of water presence. The other gentleman I'd like to acknowledge at the start of my talk is Mr. Simeone Sebundrendre, who is also very knowledgeable on Indigenous, especially our history. But if I can just formally introduce myself, my name is Milika Sobey. I'm from the clan of Rarakabindi, the tribe of Madokawa, from the Vanua of Tambanivono, from the province of Nandroganda-Bosa in the Fiji Islands. Now, I'd like to start just by giving you a bit of an introduction on the spiritual significance of freshwater and water bodies in Indigenous Fijian culture. And there's three levels of spiritual significance to water bodies. At the first level, practically every tribe in Fiji has totems, 3 totems in total. There's usually a sky totem, a tree totem, and a water totem. So for my clan, our sky totem is the peregrine falcon, which we call the Nganiwachu. Our tree totem is this one, the Tahitian chestnut tree, and that's the Latin name there, and we call in Fijian the ibi tree. And then our water totem is the freshwater goby, because my village is on the banks of the Singatoka River. And so our water totem is the goby fish, which we call the ikaniwachu. Now these totems basically is an indigenous framing of the custodianship of the natural environment. And every tribe in Fiji has all 3 totems. They're not entirely unique. Some tribes share the same totem trees, but by and large, everyone has these 3 totems. At the next level of spiritual significance of freshwater bodies is the installation of a chief. When a chief is traditionally installed, there's a ritualistic bath, or we call a sili. And this happens after he's been in confinement away from the public eye for 4 days. And this ritual bath takes place at a sacred pool or pond in the instance of inland tribes inland tribes. And if it's a coastal chief, he will take this ritualistic bath or sili in the sea. And this is really a symbolic transformation from being a mere human to one that's imbued with leadership mana. So that ritual bath at the end of confinement symbolizes his emergence of the newly born chief imbued with mana and the blessings of his people to rule the tribe's sky, earth, and water domain. At a deeper spiritual level, these bodies of water, like the one on this first slide, this is the site of our old village. So we call it Kormakawa. And the water that's often found in these old village sites are traditionally thought to be tawa, or inhabited, by children that are thought to have been, that died shortly after birth. And so they're called lubeniwai, or water babies. And they are the source of inspiration for choreographers, for matriarchs who compose our traditional poems, or wudu, or our traditional dances, or meke. The inspiration is taken from these water bodies. And these water bodies are usually held with very high respect, and they're approached by the living with reverential silence, as well as the groves, the tree groves that surround these pools. They're often rendered the same reverence. Now, in Fiji, there have also been occurrences of healing waters. There's a very famous river, Waisili River, where children with speech impediments are taken to drink from that river. And by all accounts, they are cured of those speech impediments. There's another river, Ndawasamu, that cures other disabilities and ailments. But in thinking of how to present this topic, I just find this tree so majestic, which is why I went a bit overboard with the photographs. But this is our totem tree. Don't you think it's majestic? I do. So in thinking of how to present this topic, I initially thought of demonstrating how a particular area in Fiji managed their water traditionally. But I decided to make a case for totemic plants as being a case study in water management. I looked at plant indicators of water presence and interviewed the legendary Mrs. Siwatimbao, who's 84 years old, and she gave me a list of trees or plants that are thought or known to be present wherever there's a water source. And this is just a sample of the list of trees she gave me. Yeah, it's not exhaustive. But the ticks that you find next to some of those Latin names are actually the trees that are totems of certain clans. And I found in going through the total list that she gave me that some 80% of these water indicator plants are also totems. So that's an interesting correlation, because in the past, these totem trees were always just associated with food security. But what I propose from this little bit of research that we've done is perhaps they're also an indicator for water security and not just food security. So I then went to, and think about it, this is of great significance given the impacts of climate change that we're now facing in the islands, to have these indicator plants. In interviewing elders about traditional water sources, I was then taken to see the old water source for the village of Isese. Now, Isese probably means nothing to you, but this village is of historical importance because it is at the site where the first Fijians landed thousands of years ago. And this is their traditional water source that is said to never run dry. It is protected by this tree, which is the rain tree, which is another totemic plant for certain clans in Fiji. So I was very privileged to be taken there by one of the high chiefs of the village. And other water sources that I show here, or other indicator plants, are ones that the older Fijians know. There are always indicators that water is underground. Many of the older Fijians also know of coastal ponds. So near the coastline, you will find freshwater ponds. And in those freshwater ponds, you will have trees like rhizophora that are growing there. You'll have trees like Bruguera, Gymnorrhiza that are also growing there. So one of the findings that we thought was pretty significant in doing this research was that totem plants certainly serve for water security. Now, I thought I would just tell you a little bit about the legal protection of these things because, the government of Fiji at the moment is extremely proactive in preserving traditional knowledge. And the legal protection of old village sites, like the one that I showed you of our village sites, legal protection of such areas comes under the Fiji Museum's ambit. And at the moment, on their database, the Fiji Museum holds more than 2,000 sites that include old village sites, includes caves, includes fortifications, but they have a database of some 2,000 sites of national significance. And as I mentioned, this government has been very proactive. There's a bill called the Traditional Knowledge and Expression of Culture Bill. So we basically just refer to it as TKEC, Traditional Knowledge and Expression of Culture Bill. It's taken some 20 years in the drafting. But this bill has been deliberately introduced to protect traditional knowledge systems from misappropriation. And this came about because of the misuse of the Fiji Airways logo by some, I believe, some foreign company. And so this bill will allow traditional people to seek legal redress around the misuse of their traditional knowledge, their traditional totems, and their designs. And as part of the development of this bill, cultural mapping has seen an exhaustive part of this exercise, and they've mapped intangible cultural heritage or knowledge systems from the more than 1,000 villages in the 14 provinces to date. So they've got on their database more than knowledge systems from the more than 1,000 villages in Fiji. And so this bill will hopefully be enacted into law sometime soon. Like I told you, it's been a long time in the making, but it's extremely encouraging when you have a government that is very proactive in preserving traditional knowledge. I believe my time is up. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Milika. Now I'd like to invite up to the stage Sangrawi Suwirakan. So Sang belongs to the Tayai or Shan from Chiang Mai, northern Thailand. She is a member of the Shan Women's Action Network, the Indigenous Women's Network of Thailand, and Network of Indigenous Women in Asia. Welcome, Sang.
Thank you. Thank you for AWP that give me opportunity to share about indigenous knowledge regarding to water governance in Thailand. Yes, I come from Kok River Basin. It's 285 kilometers long. Along Kok River, there are 14 indigenous people group that each group have our own unique and tradition and way of life connect to the water and the river. And today I'm going to share about Chan. And for the indigenous people along Kok River is like our school and kitchen and the transportation route. From 1824 to 1948, during the Burmese was under British colonial rule, the main business of the northern part of Thailand was export the teak wood to overseas country. Kok River is served as the primary route to deliver teak wood to the Mekong River. You can see from the picture that comparing location 1952 and 2002, it took us more than 7 decades to recover rainforest, which is crucial for because it's our watershed. The committee has taken over to take care of this forest more than over 40 years. We have regulation issued by the board of directors, consisting of the both men and women to ensure the sustainable use of commercial forests. We believe that the water from the mountain is an alternative source of clean water of daily use and consumption. To preserve the watershed forest, Chan people actively manage the environment by selectively cutting trees to preserve the watershed forest. Specifically, when we cutting bamboo shoot, we ensure to cut only the mature stalk for use, leaving the next generation to continue growing. This practice ensures sustainability and prevent overexploitation of our ancestral teaching. Bamboo is considered an indicator of the forest fertility by the Chan people. Indigenous community protect water source by planting for 4 layers of the tree. The first layer consists of the moist tree, which prevents erosion and hold the soils on the riverbank. The second layer include large chrysanthemum plant along the bank. The plants can survive even when submerged in water for a month. Indigenous people are aware that the moist root provide a habitat of the crustacean, fish, crab, and other animals. The third layer consists of different types of bamboo, which we use for food and housing. Different types of bamboo can indicate of the level of the forest moisturization. For example, bamboo for human and animal food grow not far from the river because it requires moisturized soils for bamboo to produce young sprout more quickly. However, the bamboo grow in high altitude is good for construction. Indigenous people know how to process bamboo young sprout and preserve them for off-season consumption. Bamboo sprouts are also preserved by wild boar as their food. In addition, bamboo can be used for produce different farm too. Moreover, a variety of the mushroom can be found in the bamboo forest. But if seasonal bamboo disappear from the bamboo forest, it would increase same sort of climate change. Which bamboo constructor build across river are the source of water and food. Indigenous people have passed the knowledge about wheel construction from generation to generation. When we clear forest path or cut down tree, it is not for commercial purpose, but it creates habitat and maintain a balance between people and forest. Moreover, Thai people have maintained their belief and ritual relate to water from birth to death. We worship that the gradient of watershed that protects the forest, ensuring a perpetual supply of food and water. The designated watershed forest area prevents anyone from daring to cut tree or hunt animal, making a perpetual region. There is also a forest ordination ritual where the current people tie the yellow rope around the tree, symbolizing an ordination of Buddhist monk. When a new baby is born to its mother, her or his umbilical cord shall be placed in the bamboo container and hang on a healthy tree. This customary practice implies that the soul of baby and the tree are intertwined and the tree cannot be cut anymore. While we try to care of the forest and the water, severe climate change has caused some of our native vegetation to disappear. To adapt to this changing environment, our indigenous farmers have had to modify their cultivation practice and adapt plants variety that are better suited to changing climate. However, for indigenous people, the impact of climate change is the comparison to the negative effect of the government and the private development project. For example, there are 30 sand mining operations along Cook River, exporting sand for the construction industry. This project owned by influential people, such as a member of parliament, negatively affect the environment and biodiversity. In my local area, many people have lost their land along the river due to the lack of the documentation. This has forced young people to seek jobs in the city because they can no longer continue their farmer's life. There is also a coal mining project in the Upper Cook River, Chanstet in Burma, owned by military company. This project has resorted to forced relocation of a number of the community, and some people have become illegal migrants to Thailand. There's a challenge we are facing. Development projects often benefit a small group of people while causing harm to the environment, aquatic life, and biodiversity. Once again, we are not opposed to development policy, but we believe it would be beneficial if they incorporate scientific knowledge and experience of indigenous people at a national and global level during discussion and decision-making process. We understand ourselves and our surroundings better than others else. For us, indigenous, water and forest are part of our life. When we say protect river, protect forest, we are ultimately striving to protect our people and life of others. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Sang. Now, next up, moving back to the Pacific, I'd like to invite Erina Watine to the stage. So Erina from Waikato, Aotearoa, is the Chief Scientist Maori for the New Zealand Biological Heritage Science Challenge and is also one of 5 Crown-appointed board representatives for the Waikato River Authority. Welcome, Erina.
Well, morena everyone. Thank you for joining our session in person and online. Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge the Indigenous people of these lands, the Sami. It was fantastic to spend time with you all on Sunday along with the other Indigenous groups. I also wanted to acknowledge the other panellists here this morning as well, and Australian Water Partnership for supporting my attendance today. Thank you very much. And last but not least, I also wanted to make a quick shout out to my whanaunga from Aotearoa who are also here. We have 7 up and coming leaders from my country. So if you want to know about biodiversity, climate change, water or the environment, hit them up in the break. I'm sure they'll be happy to talk to you. Okay, let's get on. Ko Taupiri te maunga, Taupiri is my mountain. Ko Waikato te awa, Waikato is my river. So the Waikato River is the longest river in Aotearoa at 425 kilometres and it has a catchment area of almost 14,000 square kilometres. It's also under a co-governance arrangement between the 5 river tribes and the New Zealand government. I can't talk about that too much today, but on Thursday at 2 p.m. there's a session around governance, and I'll talk more about the co-governance arrangements. Okay. Ko Waikato te iwi, so I belong to the Waikato tribe. I'm one of 80, oh, it's 80,000 now, not 77, 80,000 registered tribal members, and we have 68 marae, and my marae is Te Papa Orotu. Our tribe is based in the North Island of New Zealand, just pretty much halfway around the world from here. Ko Irina Ho, so my name is Irina, and these are my field assistants. They also double as my kids. So we have Tāroe on the left, he's 17, Maya in the middle, 14, and Raumati, 24, this side. And they've been helping me since they could walk. And in terms of my presentation today, I just wanted to share a little bit of our journey. It's a sovereignty piece, it's a self-determination piece, and it talks about 4 river tribes and 3 sub-tribes coming together, uniting to manage tuna, or freshwater eels, in our catchment. In this case, we didn't just want to sit at the table in terms of decision making, we made our own table and bought our own seats. So just in terms of a bit of background, tuna or freshwater eels are a taonga or treasured species for our people. We didn't have reindeer or kangaroos like my cousins, so we had to rely on freshwater eels for sustenance. And actually our survival of our tupuna or our ancestors is pretty much reliant on accessing these freshwater eels. In terms of the current state of tuna though, they're in decline. We have 3 species in our country. We have the longfin tuna, which is endemic, and its status is at risk in decline. It's Department of Conservation status. And there are a number of impacts affecting our tuna populations. So there's over-harvesting, there's been loss of habitat, there's disease, there's climate change. These have all impacted in terms of the numbers of our taonga species. I'm rushing because we've only got 10 minutes. So in terms of, in 2022, at the beginning of 2022, one of the river iwi reached out to the others. They said, hey, let's have a conversation and see if we want to kind of unite and work together in terms of looking after tuna in our catchment. And through a process of wānanga, which are like workshops, and site visits, they decided unanimously that yes, they did want to work together. And so we went through a process of identifying what their priorities were. So this was initiated by iwi themselves. It wasn't something that was imposed. And originally there were about 30 or 40 kind of ideas that were put on the table, and we were like, yeah, we're not going to be able to achieve that. So let's just narrow it down and look at the top 4. So this is what the group came up with. This is where they landed. And the number 1 priority for the group was to take over the trap and transfer program. So at Karapiro. So Karapiro is one of 8 hydro dams along our river. And when the baby eels come in, or the baby tuna come in, they come up the river from the ocean and they hit the dam and they can't go any further. So about 30 years ago, some traps were put in place at this dam at Karapiro. And this program had been run predominantly by the commercial eel fishers, and their goal was to take the baby eels and put them into the upper hydro lakes so that they could go back and harvest them later. So it was all about sustaining the industry, which wasn't really in alignment with the values of the river iwi along the river. So in order to take it from an aspiration to implementation, there were a number of kind of things that we needed to do. We needed to find resourcing, we needed to get authorisation. So the Ministry for Primary Industries authorised the commercial fishers to do this work, but their permit was running out, and so when it came up for renewal, all of the river iwi opposed its renewal, and then it didn't get renewed. So then that provided the space for river iwi to come in and take over this program. And so we did that, but we also went back to the Ministry of Primary Industries and said, we don't need a permit from you guys, we're gonna authorise it under our own river settlement. And so I wrote the permit and it got signed off by Te Ranga's boss, Taipupaki, at Waikato Tainui, so that's how that went down. And then we needed to hire 2 kaitiaki, or 2 workers who were working on behalf of the collective, who did the day-to-day work. And then we needed to make sure they had all the health and safety training and access to the dam as well. This is a bit about our process. Hopefully that works. And thanks to Tāmoko and Wai who made this. Is it going to go? So these are some of the quotes of people that were... That was Tāmoko who made that. These are some of the quotes for some of the people who were at the release site. So we were involved in all of the decision making all the way along. We authorised it, we decided where the tuna would go, we worked with the people on the ground, and when the releases happened, they took over the cultural practices when those fish were being released. So there were like karanga or waiata, like different practices, even haka, when these tuna were being released into the waterways, and it was actually quite an emotional thing for a lot of people being there and being able to give back to our river. And so another key point of difference is we didn't put them all in the upstream like previously. We put them in other parts of our catchment as well, as determined by our people, which was really cool. And in the first year we moved 500,000 baby eels, and that happened in this December to March this year, so that was our first attempt at it, and we're really happy with how that went. And yeah, you can read the quotes. Everyone was really pleased to be a part of it. Just quickly, in terms of some of the impact, we found it quite transformational for us. It reconnected people to place. There was an intergenerational transfer of knowledge, so there were like grandparents. We had 2 schools turn up one day. And so it was an ability for us to practice as kaitiaki. As I mentioned, we were using our ceremonies, our beliefs and our practices while doing this work of looking after our taonga species. It was also spiritually uplifting. Many people that were present kind of felt the wairua of the moment, or being uplifted. And also it was ecologically important for the tuna, because previously, as soon as they've been put up above the dam, that's pretty much it. There's no way for them to get back down. So the ones that we were able to put in other locations will at least have a chance of going back out to sea to spawn and continue the cycle. It's values-based, it was based on our values, and it is mana whakahaere in practice, which is about the river iwi's authority, rights and control to make decisions in their catchment in their way. Oh, and just a couple of key messages. So there's growing recognition that there are other ways of knowing, being and doing. There's also a growing body of examples of Indigenous-led approaches to biodiversity and water management. And from our perspective, there were some incredible outcomes from this for us. And just, well, this is what worked for us, so some tips that you can take or not take, but in terms of working differently, it's about connecting, listening, collaborating, co-creating, resource people to do the mahi and empower them and let them go. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Erina. That was a great presentation, and thanks for sharing the video as well. It was really, really good. Cute. Oops. Okay, so now moving around to Australia, I'd like to introduce Professor Bradley Mogridge. So Brad is a proud Camillo Murray. He's an environmental hydrologist and associate professor in Indigenous water science at the University of Canberra in Australia. Come on up, Brad.
Yam everyone. This is my country and my people, and I acknowledge Sami for their hospitality and generosity for hosting us and sharing their culture and their information and knowledge with us for this time. And also, yeah, we were lucky to engage with you last year, and it's been an absolute honour. So this is who I am. The reason I do what I do is for the young ones and the ones that are past. The young ones, not so young now, the boy's 19 with a big fat hairy mullet, and the daughter's just about to turn 16 and just about to get her her learner's permit, so scary times. What I'll talk about is how First Peoples knowledge, values and practices can be engaged with to inform water planning and resilience, develop a framework and methodology for engaging with First Peoples, and support resilient water management. On-country engagement through face-to-face interviews, even through COVID, was tough. 2 years I lost through this research, and then it was under La Nina, so it was underwater for a couple of years as well. So some really challenging times to get out there. And then identifying a set of cultural values and sites that require water that don't get water anymore. So it's using traditional knowledge to identify that. So for us, water is a key part of who we are. It's in our songs, our dances, our dreaming stories, and of course our art. So Aboriginal art is very much, because we're a dry continent, water is a key part of our connection. So our stories, our knowledge is not myth and legend, so in the realm of fiction. So I want to try and get back how our old people knew water, reconnect with it, tell our stories our way, because I got tired of hearing non-Indigenous people tell our stories. Build in Indigenous research methodologies, rights and values of water, so decolonise water is our challenge, and then culturally validate our knowledge, not scientifically, culturally validate our knowledge. And then, yeah, that's one of my totems, Yaba, Morelia spilata, the carpet snake, and that's through my grandparents. And that's sort of where our totemic system was lost at that point. So this is where I did my study. It's in northwest New South Wales on the eastern seaboard. That's our country there. It's a fair chunk of New South Wales and up into Queensland. And the Guida wetlands is within that, and it's a Ramsar listed site, and it's also very significant. So I'll tell you a bit about our challenges for that. It's a state conservation area. It'll never be a national park because there's potentially coal seam gas under it. So we're restricted by that with our, obviously, access. We still don't have the keys to our country, but some of that land is coming back into public ownership, so that gives us access. So it's really only, it was 9.7% in public hands, so National Parks has the keys to our country at the moment. So it's originally, it was more than 100,000 hectares, and a lot of that was all private land. So private land that now public agencies are now buying back that land to build in, because obviously there's Ramsar, there's biological and ecological, but the cultural aspect is still unknown. So when you think about that, our mob is 160 years of being locked out. So we've lost all those generations of connection. So what I tried to do with my methodology was shift the paradigm away from Kamilaroi people being the researched to me becoming a researcher for them. So I'm still learning every time I go on country and how I relate to it. It's always a journey that I'm on, and reconnecting with country is very special. So that word repatriate water and decolonise water is very important. So a lot of our stories are women's stories, especially on our country, and especially the groundwaters. Being a hydrogeologist, I need to be very careful about some of the places I go to or can't go to, I suppose. And so getting our women to tell their stories and reconnect with these places. And, you know, sometimes I'm not allowed to go to these places. And I suppose it's our knowledge and methods, we are evolving with and adapting to these changes. Time for mitigation is over. We have to adapt now. And obviously trying to fill the void of water management with Kamilaroi science. So this is sort of my mantra, you know, by Kamilaroi, with Kamilaroi, for Kamilaroi. And there's a little article there I did around research methodologies. So Kamilaroi people were interviewed on country when I could get access. I'm about 900 kilometres away from my land, and so it's a fair trek to get there. There was a generic set of survey questions, but a lot of them just went out the door and we just sat by the fire and yarned. So it was pretty special. And so what I found that there's a lot of Kamilaroi language in this landscape taken up by non-Indigenous people to name their road or name their property by Kamilaroi words. So I think that's a common thing across Australia. And the Guida wetlands, where I did my study, is yet to have an extensive cultural heritage survey. So to a point, we don't really know what's left with regard to agriculture. It was mainly agriculture, so grazing, and also irrigated agriculture, so like things like cotton. And climate change, we can already see it. Even through my visits over the last 10 years, you see climate change impacting. So this was October 2020, one of our biggest water holes, the Gingham waterhole, and looking magnificent. And this was 2 months later, bone dry. So you can sort of see the white. It's a boom to collect water hyacinth, an exotic and pretty bad weed. So that's my son walking across that waterhole. So I suppose we're feeling it right now. So what I found was that there's a contingency allowance for the environment in the water plan, and we'd potentially been offered, that's purely for ecological outcomes, and we're looking to build that into to get cultural outcomes, to deliver some of this water for cultural outcomes rather than just ecological. There are some places that used to get regular water and now they don't. And there's a lot of, we don't have a say in when and where water's delivered. And then because it's flat country, you only need to build a small mound to divert water away, those flood waters away. So a lot of our water is not getting to the places that should be there. So what I used as part of this research was identify cultural indicators and also cultural values that were connected to sites in this space. And yeah, even non-Indigenous people had connections to this place. So they, aesthetics, it was nice to look at, but also ducks for hunting back in the old days. So yeah, it even got the name Duck Lagoon from the local people from there. And then we found a large lagoon, and it was called Turramungri, in old cadastre maps, and it needs regular watering. And there's a red sand ridge that runs through the centre of that. And there's obviously a lot of cultural species in this sand ridge. So definitely these plants were moved and translocated from other parts of country. So when the country's in flood, they have all the resources they need to access. This was the old map we found that had Turramungri. It was called, well, there's a dam there, but that dam's no longer there, but the lagoon's still there. And that, after La Nina in 2022, we got a brief window to get out there because it's black soils and you bog up to your axles if you go out there when it's wet. So we got a small window and we saw Turramungri in all its glory, which was magnificent to see. So this is my journey as well. So I suppose it's Burugu is our creation, so it's knowing who you are and where you're from. And yeah, linked to that is the sky camp where the old people go to when they pass on. Ceremony is Bura, law is our Bigan, and song is Yugul, and story is our Durumbali. And then Winangali is to hear, to listen. That's knowing your story. Listen to country, listen to people. And as I showed earlier, my carpet snake totem, speak the language and care for country. So that's Mother Earth is Gunima, and Galamali is caring for her. And then Wuri is to give, by, for, with Kamilaroi, tell our stories our way. And I suppose this was me, that's all the aspects of country. Water is Gali, wind is Miyara, fire is we, and we had a smoking oven earlier. Hopefully there was no we. And we have country as well, which is Wallaby. And so I suppose that is my journey. This is me. This is, and then it's my evolution of my beard through COVID. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you so much, Brad. And it was great to see these photos of these little field assistants as well popping up in presentations too. Okay, so next up we have Michelle Hobbs. So Michelle is a descendant of the Bidjara and Dunghutti peoples. She is a freshwater woman and an aquatic ecologist and associate lecturer at Griffith University. So please welcome Michelle to the stage.
Morning, everyone. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Sami people of the lands that we're on and acknowledge their custodianship and their care of these lands and waters, and thank them for welcoming us into their place. I'd also like to acknowledge my own ancestors, Bidjara and Dunghutti. So we have a long history of water management in Australia, but there is this pervasive and largely unacknowledged assumption that in Australia, before Europeans arrived, everything was in some kind of magical, natural state and everything was perfect. And I guess you could look at it like that. But it ends up giving us this kind of blind spot when we assume that before Europeans arrived, everything was just as it was without human influence. So I'm going to share with you today some of my observations, a fairly high-level overview of some of my observations from working in water quality policy in government, in environmental consulting and in research now. Just how this blind spot sort of plays out in the way that we approach water management in Australia. So when we ignore the fact that Aboriginal people in Australia have been managing water places, we're ignoring the 65,000 years of human occupation in mainland Australia. And just to give you a couple of sort of concrete examples of Aboriginal water management, and these are not top secret, these are not hard examples to find, they're very much well published, well researched and in the public domain. So the first one is the Badijawa people of the Kimberley region. They manage their wetlands in a particular way so that they improve water quality for longer at the end of the wet season. So what they do is they get in there and they remove excess vegetation from the wetlands to improve the oxygenation of the water, and they also undertake a bit of mangrove clearing to improve the flow of the water out of the wetland at the end of the wet season so the water flows for longer and stays healthier for longer. And that is specifically for the purpose of improving water quality for drinking and for human use and for the benefit of the wetland itself. Another example, the picture on the right here, is a place called Budgebim in Victoria in the south of Australia. And the Gundjamara people established thousands and thousands of square kilometres of aquaculture systems to increase freshwater eel productivity. So it's a huge, huge expansive area of these interconnected shallow channels where eels could proliferate in a really productive way to enhance the food supplies and boost the ecosystems in that area. So academic and Yaman Bidjara woman, Marcia Langton, describes this situation as yet another form of colonisation and exploitation, to ignore that our landscapes are actually biocultural landscapes. They inherently involve people. These landscapes have been created and shaped by people over millennia into productive and livable ecosystems. So as Aboriginal people, we see rivers as living beings, inseparable from the land and the sky. You can't separate the water from the riverbed and from the land around it. But our legislation separates all of that. Water has been turned into a commodity. You have to buy licences to purchase water, and it is managed completely separately from the way that the land and everything else is managed. And it hasn't served rivers well. When you talk about river health, it's kind of one of those fuzzy terms. It kind of depends who you ask and what their values are. But in the days before water treatment as we know it today, the river water had to be good enough to drink. That was the goal. And in a lot of women's places in some areas, it also had to be good enough to give birth in. And that's a cultural right that we pretty much don't have access to anymore. So to go to the Murray-Darling Basin, which is one of the biggest river basins, the biggest river basin in Australia, there's a record in one of the explorers' diaries, Thomas Mitchell, in 1835 on the Darling River, which describes the river as the water being beautifully transparent. The bottom was visible at great depths, showing large fishes in shoals floating like birds in midair. And Uncle Badger Bates, a Barkanji man, talks about the ribbonweed that used to grow in the clear waters of the Barker River. But what we see now in the Darling, and that's the picture on the left, that's the Darling River there. What we see now is that the water is never clear. There are no water plants. There's an over-allocation of water. There's land clearing, there's cattle impacts, weeds, increasing droughts. This photo was at the end of the last drought in 2019. And all of this leads to reduced river health. And there's also this collective amnesia, forgetting what the river used to be like. In living memory, yes, the river's always been brown and dirty, but you go back further than that and the river was completely different. It was clear. So our scientific records are also short. They only extend back 50, 100, 150 years, and that's what all of our management is based on. But Indigenous memories are long, really long, and are based on observations that have been handed down over thousands of years. So the point that I wanted to make in terms of climate change is that research shows that looking after catchment and river health can actually help with the big things like droughts, floods, climate change. When you have really good vegetation cover in your catchment, it reduces evaporation, increases groundwater recharge. The riparian zones along the river edges are really key for reducing temperatures, stabilising banks, providing habitat. Protecting or emulating natural flows in rivers is really particularly important for rivers, and using Aboriginal knowledges to inform environmental cultural flows really maintains biodiversity and recharges wetlands. And looking after these things gives us a much better shot at anticipating some of the things that we're expecting to happen during climate change, such as extended drought and those sorts of things, and flood mitigation as well. So the point is we have to prioritise looking after catchment health to be able to adapt to climate change, and Indigenous knowledges are really key in providing that knowledge and that on-ground, ongoing care for country. So river health is an important part of Aboriginal cultural heritage. And when I talk about cultural heritage, usually we are restricted to talking about physical artefacts, such as, old tools and scar trees and physical things, but the cultural heritage also includes the living landscape itself. And I see Indigenous knowledges as contributing in two key ways to river management. The first one is just priorities, putting the health of the river first, putting the well-being of the river first, letting it flow, letting it be healthy, because we can't survive without the water sources being healthy. And the second one is traditional ecological knowledge or biocultural knowledge, or however you want to put it, those observations that are passed down over generations. However, those observations are often inseparable from culture. You can't necessarily take all of that information out of its cultural context because it loses meaning and it's not appropriate to use it in that way. So it's really important to enable Indigenous people to maintain control of their knowledge and use it in ways that they see that's appropriate. So in terms of what is happening now in Australia in terms of two-eyed seeing, we are taking small steps in making use of both Indigenous and Western science in water quality. And governments are getting better at engaging Aboriginal people to consider values and uses of water in management plans, but these still separate the management of water quality from water quantity. So one example that I wanted to share with you was, in Australia we use something called the Australia-New Zealand Water Quality Guidelines. And this is a substantial data set of, I guess, 100, 200 years of water quality data from Australia and New Zealand. And this is used by government and by mining proponents to set local water quality guidelines and objectives, local guidelines, but also more large-scale guidelines. And in a regulatory context, this is used, it's relevant to drinking water and also ecosystem health targets. However, there is also a fantastic tool that has been developed by some of my colleagues, Brad Mogridge, and I think Phil was involved as well. It's a tool that highlights and upholds the spiritual and cultural values in the context of deriving local water quality guidelines. So deriving guidelines that uphold those cultural and spiritual values instead of just relying on the scientific data. But to our knowledge, this tool hasn't been used very widely. And I see one of the reasons for that is because policy doesn't demand that it be used. When it comes to regulation policy in mining, the only thing that they need to consider is cultural heritage. So we get shoehorned into only being able to talk about those physical cultural artefacts and not being able to have a seat at the table in setting environmental targets for our waters. So Indigenous people need to be considered experts in the knowledge that they hold and not just consulted, but be at the table in making decisions. So to sum up, we know that relationships and having a holistic viewpoint and approach to managing rivers is really critical to river health. And Indigenous knowledges on river health extend back thousands of years, and this could be potentially incredibly useful when it comes to adapting to a changing climate. We've seen changes in climate happen before. And Indigenous knowledges prioritise the well-being of the river and the sacred water first, because it is so important. If you don't have water, you have nothing. And this is going to be key in climate resilience moving forward. And there are key gaps in policy that we need to close. So moving forward from just engagement to having Indigenous experts at the table in making those decisions. And stronger policy that demands that Indigenous values are actually protected and are part of the objectives and not just written down and documented and kept on file. So we need regulation that supports Indigenous people to participate in environmental management. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And please just join me in thanking once again all of our panellists. So now we have some time for questions and answers. We've got about 15, 20 minutes, which is great. So for those of you online, feel free to pop a question in the chat. And for those of you in the room, we'll have some mics going around. And perhaps I'll just offer a few of my own reflections, if I may, on that, just while you're thinking of your questions. So I think, you know, what I would take away from those presentations is that the traditional knowledge that we heard about today about waterways and about natural environment is obviously very, very deeply entwined with culture. The other thing I observed that was common amongst the presentations is that the knowledge holders that we heard from hold their knowledge as part of their nation and part of their community, and that knowledge has been received through generations. We heard them talk about the conversations that they had with their elders as part of their projects. I don't think we heard anyone talk about taking a water plant or a water species and going off and studying it in a lab and then presenting their findings on that. I think that's significant. And I think the other thing that we can take away from these presentations is that the process of decolonisation of the broader environment in which these traditional knowledge systems sit is really only beginning and has a very long way to go. And so I think these perhaps are useful things to keep in mind as we begin to think about how we might approach two-eyed seeing. Okay, so with that, I'll open it up to questions. Does anyone... Oh, we have a question there from Inga.
Hello, I'm Inge Frisk of the Sami Association in Stockholm. Now, I'm not going to relate to any Sami issue, but today there is a rush for restoring wetlands in Sweden and probably Norway and Finland and Russia as well. And I hear reports on that in north of our country, including Sapmi, our wetland projects are not giving the expected results. A diminishing of methane fumes. So I just wonder, it would be spectacular if we could have a second opinion from your restoration projects on restored wetlands. Thank you. You think that would be possible? What are the success factors in restoring wetlands? What are the failures you have seen in your project?
Would anyone like to take on that one from our panellists about success factors for restoring wetlands? Michelle? Yep.
Thank you for the question. And it's probably a really difficult one to answer. From my understanding, like there's so much research into restoring wetlands and other ecosystems all around the world, and the recurring theme that I keep hearing is that every situation is different because, you know, the relationships between the different organisms in each place is going to be inherently different. So I think that's where it comes back to trial and error and trying again and really observing what is happening in each particular wetland. And that's where local knowledge is so important, because each piece of land has completely different relationships and operates in a different way, which is why Indigenous knowledge is so valuable, because it's place-based. It's based in that area. So I probably can't comment too much more, but that's what I've got.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Yeah, a lot of the rehabilitation is through adaptive management, so it's learning by doing, whereas Indigenous knowledge is knowing and being. So we're already part of that system, and I think that's where we're being missed. We're not getting that opportunity to have our voice in rehabilitation of these sites. So, you know, our stories and our connections link back to the pre-development days, you know, so I suppose it's identifying those cultural species that are there, the ones that aren't there, and then also the important ones that should be there, like, you know, Elena was talking about their Tonga species, and like some of those species are our keystone species. So, you know, if the brolgar, which is a bird that travels around the globe, and, you know, from Siberia and places like that, if it's turning up at our wetlands and we're allowed to watch it dance, it does a really cool dance. If you YouTube the brolga dance, the mating dance, and if they're turning up to our wetlands, we are happy. You know, we feel happy. We can watch it and we can mimic it in our dance. So I suppose there's a long way to go in rehabilitation, especially in the Australian context. If we're involved and part of that solution, then we feel we're going to get better outcomes for our traditional lands because, and our water places, if our species are happy, our trees are happy, our country is happy, our water is happy, we are happy.
Thanks, Brad. We'll take a question from the room and then I've got one online here as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. My name is George de Gooijer. Many things to react to. I did a lot of work with water management and environmental and social impact assessments. And your topic reminded me of a study done by a friend of mine, Rutger Boelens, who studied water management in South America, and his PhD was called the rules of the game and the game of the rules. And what we're talking about is systems that are clashing or trying to meet, hopefully. What you were saying, Michelle, about providing access, it seemed that you were also talking about environmental impact assessments, but maybe I'm mistaken. And I realized that there are sort of overarching rule systems that can be used for that in environmental and social impact assessment, and those are used for creating the possibilities for big projects to be done, among other things. I hear you say something that seems to indicate that there should be more space or better space for giving access to traditional value systems, and can you expand a little bit on that, and because it's so difficult to make systems meet, but how that there might be a way there because there is a global association looking at the rules for doing environmental and social impact assessments. By changing those and tweaking those systems, you could also create a better channel for communication between those systems and knowledge systems.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about. In an Australian context, which sounds like it's similar worldwide, for example, when a mining company wants to build a mine, they have to do an environmental impact assessment. And what they have to put in that report is set by the state government. And they will only do what they have to do. They're not going to go above and beyond. They're not going to do anything extra. They're going to do just what they have to do to meet the requirements that the government set. And the people who are assessing the applications are also very busy, and they're not going to ask for anything extra. So those pieces of policy and requirements are just so important in setting the tone for what we require to allow these sorts of projects to go ahead. So if we can incorporate more holistic, more cultural values, shared objectives, and even just better communication, because the communication between mining companies and Indigenous people in terms of what is physically going to happen on their land is absolutely atrocious. There's almost no requirements to put it in plain language and to help them understand, even when they're negotiating agreements on native lands. So yeah, thank you for the question. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, well, questions are invitations to creativity. Yeah? So this environmental social impact assessment, it is one of the tools that we can use for making this conversation in all these different domains happen. So it's a moment of decision making that needs to be informed. And how do you inform it with traditional knowledge? And how do you give access to all these different aspects? That is what my...
Yeah, just imagine if we set the bar so much higher and said, you've got to engage people appropriately, you've got to ask them what their objectives are, you've got to give them what they need. We'll change the world.
Thank you, great points. And Irena's got a comment on that as well.
I just wanted to add from a New Zealand context that cultural impact assessments have been going on for quite a few years now, and what we've noticed is that they are site-specific, right? So a framework that's been developed for my lake is not the same as a framework that should be developed for a lake that might be 50 kilometres up the river. So the knowledge of the people at place informs the cultural monitoring framework that's been developed for that place. So that's just a little bit of context from our part of the world. So if we tried to pick up my framework and apply it across the country, there'd be a war.
So, Sang, the question is, how did you restore the rainwater forest? Was it using traditional techniques, or did it involve new age technologies as well? So that's a specific question for you. Would you like to come up and speak to that? How did you restore your rainwater forest, and was it using traditional techniques, or did you use modern technology as well? Yeah.
As my English barrier, maybe I need my friend to assist me, as she know Indigenous people same as me. Can I ask Sucheta to help?
Maybe I will just have to start, and Singh can also add. I think in the presentation she have mentioned a lot about the importance of the forest along the Kok River that play a very vital role for the livelihood of the people, and that how people that live along Kok River from Shan group have live with the forest and harvest the forest in the traditional ways that sustain it for the future use. But at the end of her presentation, she also demonstrate about the current development model that happened, and some of those are from upstream, outside of the border in Thailand and into Burma side, that is quite, we can say, out of control for the indigenous people to protect. So I think these are demonstrate the threat that happening along the river, and it called for more attention as the core message that Seng has present. This is, but you can also add more on the initiative at the local level that have been done to replenish the forest along the Kok River. You have specific.
Yeah, so actually it's a lot of things. It's a chance that I'm here, I have many things to talk, but because of my English that I cannot explain all. So I'm sorry. Thank you.
That's no problem at all, Sang. Your presentation was very informative, and perhaps over a cup of tea might be a better place for a conversation later. Are there any other questions in the room? Yeah, we'll go to this gentleman.
Thank you so much for the beautiful session. So I think my question would be to either Melika can answer or Irina, because they spoke about how the government is working with their communities, and Irina especially mentioned about co-governance. While Sangruwe talked about how government is not supporting them. In fact, yesterday in one of the sessions, I think Anna showed us a video clip in which the government is completely rejecting even the existence of indigenous people and communities. So just within these two sessions, we have seen government helping the communities and government not even acknowledging the existence of communities. So my question is, for those countries where the government is working together with the indigenous communities, how did you get the government to do that? And what would be your recommendations towards the countries where the government is not even willing to accept the existence of such communities? Thank you.
Okay, would any of our panellists like to have a go at that one?
I guess in our case, in 1863, our tribal lands were invaded and we were pushed off our whenua, and that was called raupatu for us. And it was a process from then, 1863, right up until 1995. So it was an intergenerational fight from our ancestors that got us to this place that we're in now. So the land was settled in 1995, and then the river settlement happened in 2010, and it's a result of the work of our tupuna, our ancestors, that we're able to kind of benefit from the work that they've done and kind of make our own actions moving forward. And so that's pretty much how it came about. It was the fight of our ancestors, and they never gave up. And now we have a settlement that's helped us. In terms of advice moving forward, I feel like it's quite location and site specific, so I don't want to be sort of saying, oh, well, this is what worked for us, so it's going to work for you guys. It's probably more a cup of tea conversation that I'd be happy to have. And there's other people that are working here for our tribe too that might be able to assist in terms of some strategies moving forward. That's what I can say from my perspective.
That's a really interesting question. Our country, Fiji, we've been racked by the political turmoil. We've had 4 military coups. And I think one of the underlying reasons for the government's support in recording all this traditional knowledge is because Itoke people have felt threatened in their own country, because we have a large population that was brought in by the British, and they took over the economy. And I think that, the political turmoil has arisen because of that threat to the indigenous sovereignty, but also because we've got a very rich oral history. And, even in doing the research for this talk, there's very little documented. Everything is just orally passed down, and so you've got to find all the older people that are fast disappearing. So I think the government's aware of that they really need to start documenting these things. And so we've gone from the old-fashioned writing longhand in our book of genealogy, every Fijian child that is born, to digitizing everything now. But I might just, I think that's the underlying reason, is because of our political history, native Fijians feeling threatened in their own country, that the government's trying to say, you know what, we've got this, we've got your back, we'll start preserving this traditional knowledge systems. And they've been very proactive in the last 2 decades or so in trying to do that. And also, credit to people, we've had some very vocal Fijians that have said, we've really got to preserve our culture. And they've done a wonderful job in raising awareness with the government bureaucracy. And I think that's where things have really just started to snowball. Thank you.
I'll just invite our other panellists if they wanted to make a comment in response to that question about any strategies for engaging with government before, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up, and I'll invite Phil Duncan to the stage to make some final remarks. But firstly, I'll just give our other panellists an opportunity to comment on your experience in dealing with government. Oh, could we get this mic on over here, if that's okay, please? Oh, it's on.
Oh, hello. Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, I think there are another channel from the online question. Can leave the contact for me. I'm sorry that I cannot respond immediately, but I can give the answer later. Give me the contact. And our friend in this room, if we, in the coffee time, if you are interested in my presentation, we can take time, sit down and talk, because I hope you understand my English and I need to take time to understand. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sang. That's totally understandable. So perhaps for our online participant who had the question for Sang, if you're able to perhaps pop your contact details in the chat as well, then we can connect you directly to facilitate a conversation later. All right, so we might need to move to wrapping up now. Phil Duncan, I will invite to the stage. So Phil is a proud Gomeroi man, and he is the Galambani Professorial Fellow for the University of Canberra in Australia, and so he's going to give some final reflections. Thanks, Phil.
Marabu, that's thank you in my language, and Marabu to the panellists. That was simply awesome. Some of you may be wondering why, from an Indigenous perspective from Australia, I just want to add to the welcome to country. For us in Australia, it's just a modern day interpretation of an ancient custom and practice where one seeks and receives permission to move through lands beyond our own traditional boundaries. It's cultural protocols, and it's been that well received, it cascades across all levels of government and through community. And when we came here last year and this year, we are so proud to have influenced through our established relationship with the Sami to welcome us. So I just wanted to add that. We've been taken on a journey. This is just my reflections. And I hope that you've been taken on that journey with these amazing panellists. And there's a couple of messages that I want to get into. We as Indigenous people, what you saw, they talk in the mirrors. We are bound by our cultural responsibilities and obligations. They know their country. They know their country. You know, and that cultural responsibility and obligation and the knowledge that has been handed down transgenerationally. Another thing that I saw was that this new ideology of systems thinking. Indigenous people think spatially, they think temporally. They think about the people upstream, they think about the obligation of place where we are or where they are, but they also think about that obligation of people downstream and ensuring water connects, not just country but people as well in those values. We heard about the knowledge about cultural health indicators in our systems. Mirrors again. So there's a couple of other things you saw. Collaboration. What an amazing opportunity you've had today to be taken on a journey through a range of speakers that have invested their hearts, their souls and their culture. Not to entertain you, but to get you thinking, to challenge you to think. And I again applaud them for that. I want you to think about what I heard, and this is just me giving reflections, cultural science, is the missing ingredient. And these people have already, our panellists have clearly demonstrated a sound ability of knowing country. And that cultural science is the missing ingredient in global water management and climate change. And our ability to be mobile and adaptable. I think the other aspect of this is that Indigenous cultural and intellectual property, the generosity of spirit of these people to share their journey, their knowledge and their commitment to being better together on this international stage, but also sharing that knowledge from a local footprint. I encourage you to come with a wondering mind, to leave your preconceived positions at the door when you start talking with these people, with any Indigenous people globally. Because we aspire to be the key to a brighter future. And when we think about, and one other thing I've heard about is looking at the future through the eyes of our children, our next generations. And when you think about the challenges, think about your children, because that's what these people have given me today, and I hope that they've given that message to you. So Marabou, I hope you've really enjoyed being challenged. I hope you've really embraced the wonderful array of knowledge. And I also want to highlight that most of the panellists were all women. And I think that is... But our two-eyed seeing continues, and I want to say to our moderator, thank you again for always being with us. Thank you for your leadership in our country, Australia. And please, for those that want to come to our training session, please do. AWP, eWater, thank you for what you do with us and, you know, walking with us. So, Marabou.
Thanks, Phil. And yeah, sadly, we're going to have to draw to a close there. I'm sure we could talk all afternoon, but thank you all for attending. Thanks to you, those of you online who rejoined us after our short intermission. And yeah, there's another session on Indigenous voices in water governance at 2 o'clock this afternoon. So if you're interested, please get along to that one as well. Thanks, everyone.